Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. I'm Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I'm joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian. And just answer me one question. Do you see the value of having the Bible in your home? Yes, then that's the end of it. I'm leaving.
Jason, I feel like you could sell me a Bible, but you could probably do at least as well as the people in this film, if not better, given how they fare.
I think I'd be so miserable, Josh.
Yeah, it is miserable. We're going to look at some misery here in this episode. In this season of Awesome Movie Year, we're talking about the films of 1969, and we are here at our documentary pick, which is Salesman, from directors David and Albert Maysles and Charlotte Zwerin. The Maysles brothers, some of the most famous documentary filmmakers of all time. We have already done an episode on one of their equally famous films, Grey Gardens. And they're, even when this was before Grey Gardens, I love the way that this opens with the credit, and it's like the Maysles brothers, like they're, Martin Scorsese or something like that. So they're the gold standard here of documentaries.
They're in the Awesome Movie Year Hall of Fame, #1 pick documentarian, Josh. So it's Rob Reiner, it's the Maysles brothers, and you figure out the rest.
Yeah, well, we haven't quite covered them as much as Rob Reiner.
This is our third episode on them, really, because we've talked about other films that they've been involved with.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about their film they directed, Grey Gardens, and they were participants in the Don't Look Back, the Bob Dylan film, but which is directed by D.A. Pennebaker. So, I think they're not at Reiner levels yet, but maybe they'll aspire to that. And of course, it increased our coverage of the Reiner family earlier this season with Carl Reiner. So, really, we have to expand on that. But no, this film is certainly, like Grey Gardens, one of the most famous documentaries really of all time. It's a key film in this movement of direct cinema that began kind of in the mid to late 50s with the development of equipment that could be more easily carried around and sound recorded, especially on the fly more, where documentary filmmakers couldn't follow subjects the way that they follow their subjects in this movie, even if they had wanted to or thought of doing it in this way, prior to this.
Right. So that gives it a more verite feeling, fly on the wall. Although, a lot of this does feel staged to me.
I guess. And it's interesting reading the reviews, how many of them focused on that idea of this being somehow kind of inauthentic. And I feel like we've gotten documentaries or, reality shows in the current era that there's such a higher level of fakery going on that this, to me, struck me as quite authentic, especially compared to some of what we have now.
Well, maybe you're the faker, Josh.
Maybe I am. I'm just spinning fakery here on this podcast. But interestingly, although the Maysles brothers were, at this point at least, relatively well known as purveyors of this kind of cinema and as the pioneers of a new kind of documentary, this movie was rejected for distribution because it was too depressing, which is not hard to imagine. So they distributed it themselves, starting with its opening in New York City. And I don't know how extensively it made it into theaters around the country. As I think we've talked about on a bunch of documentary episodes, movies like this often would reach much wider audiences because they would play on public television or they would be shown at educational institutions. And I have to think that that's something that went on here as well. But no box office figures that I could find for this movie, but they did distribute it themselves as well as get that financing together themselves too.
Right. $100,000 self-financed. They paid each of the salesmen $100 along with their expenses.
Yeah, it's
So these salesmen may be good at selling, but not making good deals for themselves.
right. Yeah, maybe they should have negotiated a higher price. But the Maysles themselves had been salesmen, not Bible salesmen, I don't think, but had worked in sales. And so maybe they were perhaps better at negotiating than the subjects of this film.
I feel like the missed opportunity here is sending Paul Brennan, the star of this, to Big and Little Edie from Grey Gardens and having having him sell them Bibles.
Yeah, you want a whole like Maysles cinematic universe going on here, right?
That's right. Just tell me one question. Do you see a value or not? Oh, what is he, a marble fawn? Come on, get out of here. My mom was a singer.
Jason really, really working the whole range of Maysles subject impressions here.
Really going for the widest audience possible. Yeah. This is what they want, Josh.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So again, as I said, this movie was well reviewed, but a lot of these critics came at this with a level of skepticism, I think, that I did not necessarily expect. So Vincent Canby in the New York Times said, Albert and David Maysles' Salesman is a documentary feature about 4 door-to-door Bible salesmen who move horizontally through the capitalistic dream. It's such a fine, pure picture of a small section of American life that I can't imagine it's ever seeming irrelevant, either as a social document or as one of the best examples of what's called cinema verite or direct cinema. Salesman is hardly a romantic movie, but in a curious way, it's just as exotic and strange a journey as any that the late Robert Flaherty of Nanook of the North ever took through the Arctic or the South Seas. It may not be the entire story of America or even the salesmen themselves, whose private lives are barely touched, but it is a valuable and sometimes very funny footnote to contemporary history.
Yeah, and it's become a timepiece because, not to say that there aren't door-to-door salesmen, but that's not really a career anymore, I would say.
Yeah, I don't even know if there are. I guess maybe I did have someone come to my door to try to sell me like internet service or something one time.
Solar, that's the big thing now.
Solar, yeah, you're right. Yeah. That would be what the movie would be now.
Mm-hmm. Did any of you guys, when like, say we graduated high school, did any of you sell those knives? That was the big thing when we were like teenagers, going and selling those like kitchen knives to people.
Yeah, my sister... Demo. My sister Brandy did that for years and was quite successful at it. She had I mean, it was a decent job for her. Although I think she did well and she's very personable, so I'm sure that helps. But I think it was one of those things that you can end up in a hole because I think you have to like buy the demonstration kit yourself first and then make up for it. And it's not really a good, it's a pyramid scheme kind of thing. I guess that also like multi-level marketing and, what is it like? Is it not Lululemon, but some of those like exercise clothes and candles and things like that.
Avon.
Yeah, that would be the modern version. They don't go door to door, but they have these like, parties and you try to rope in your friends and stuff like that.
Right. You have to, I mean, there's been plenty of podcasts and documentaries, but you buy all this. It's Amway, right? You buy all this stuff like, hey, you could get checks, but have you had crispy ridges? They're like checks, but cheaper and just as good.
Yeah, I mean, and we never get the sense. I don't know if these salesmen had to buy their own like demonstration Bibles or whatever. I think not. And they clearly work directly like as employees for this company, the Mid-American Bible Company. And I'm sure they're working on commission, but at the same time, maybe this is a less predatory organization than some of those modern MLMs.
I honestly don't know because I had seen this movie maybe a couple of years ago, right? And I liked it. I actually liked it better this time, but I liked the characters less this time because since I had seen it before, maybe I was paying a little more attention to the tricks of their sales and they all suck. Like, I mean, I know they're doing their job, but they're all like, well, if they say no this way, then throw this at them. And if they say no this way, throw this at them. And it's like, leave these people alone. They don't want your Christian encyclopedia.
Yeah, I think so. But at the same time, I think we're meant to see that they're sort of stuck within this system as well.
Yeah, so, right. Well, yeah. Josh, we just got done talking about institutionalism and how it can hurt so many people. Just another example of that. Shout out to the Catholic Church.
Yeah. Right. Who are actually like officially sponsors of this scheme, let's say. So Margot Hentoff in the New York Review of Books touches on this a bit, actually. She says, Fundamentally, this is a film about money. It makes us think of money in a context we have ignored in our disgust at abundance and concern for the poor. Here, there is not the specious pain of money not being enough, but the anxiety provoked by not quite enough money to buy all the things that affluent people have for ballast. Not enough to make a salesman a success, to buy off a class sense of failure. The Maysles view is, of course, that the salesmen are as much victims as pursuers, hooked by the illusions that it is not dirty work that they do, but only their jobs, that an open-ended paycheck means limitless possibility, that free enterprise makes them free men. The Maysles show us the Yankee peddler gone bad, the end of frontiers, and the rotten way in which the hunt for money forms the structures of days.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, if you met all these guys at a barbecue, they'd be like really charming and fun, and you'd want to hang out with them. But like, it's a real turnoff when, you know, the idea of not taking no for an answer and continuing the sell. Like, that's where I was like, oh man, just leave these people alone.
Right. And they are always basically, it seems like they're targeting people who don't really have very much money. And I don't know, that's partially their strategy. Partially it's that they're working directly through the church. They have to go to these churches that will accept them, putting up their like display where people can sign up, and that's how they get their leads. And so maybe these are churches that are in poorer neighborhoods or whatever that are willing to do this. I don't know. There's one brief mention. I don't know if it was Paul or one of the other salesmen talks about how it in a way is also difficult to sell rich people because they have the money, but they're like it's easier for them to dismiss you or whatever. But we never see them trying to sell to someone for whom the $50 that it would cost to buy a Bible is no big deal.
Well, and I think that's what bothered me about it, right? Like, you see them talking to these people and they're like, I don't have $1 to spare a week. And they're like, come on, you have $1 to spare a week. And it's almost, it's unbecoming, Josh, is what it is.
Yeah. And it was interesting to me too, because $50 for this fancy book right now sounds like maybe about right. But I looked this up, and in 1969, $50 was the equivalent in 2024 of $428. That's what they're charging for this Bible.
Well, how can you put a price on what it'll bring to you and your family? Look at these beautiful pictures. You want your kids to grow up with this, don't you?
Right. And maybe this was also a time when that kind of thing was more central to people's lives. Not that there aren't many religious people, but now, but the idea that every home had to have something like this. But like the idea that this would have cost the equivalent of $400, like no one would pay that now. That would be insane to pay that much money for this fancy ass Bible.
Well, that's what we think. But like you said, we're not living in the Bible Belt for one thing. So I bet there are plenty of people who pay more for other things that are, let's say, less literary than the Bible.
Yeah, probably so. So finally, Joe Morgenstern in Newsweek was, again, skeptical of sort of how this was put together. He said, Salesman purports to be a purely factual depiction of 4 dishonest-to-God peddlers selling $50 illustrated Bibles for a living. It's an important film for the questions it raises, not merely aesthetic and ethical questions about the documentary genre, but the central question of whether life in these United States is really as bleak as the peddlers and their customers suggest. The evidence in the film is appalling, but I think it's also inadmissible at worst, inconclusive at best. Every day I see and read about much more ghastly goings-on than anything the Maysles brothers found, so I'm certainly not going to naysay Salesman for its naysaying. But contempt and self-contempt are so much in style at the moment that I do wish people would see this film for what it is, a number of people with a number of things in common trying to play themselves, rather than the gospel truth about the state of the whole union.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that about any documentary, though, right?
Right. And I think maybe because this was a newish form of documentary that these critics are sort of working out that perspective that we now take for granted here. One of the other reviews, I don't remember if this one or another one, points out this sort of like shocking idea that they would have shot a lot more footage than they used, which is so obvious to us now. But the idea that this was selectively edited, maybe not something that people would have understood as much at this time.
That's the Maysles are masters of that and finding the right characters to focus on. Originally, this was supposed to really focus on all 4 of them. Paul Brennan, the Badger, Charles McDevitt, the Gipper, James Baker, the Rabbit, and Raymond Martos, the Bull. But, as they went into edit, they found that Brennan was the story and the right one to follow. And clearly he was. Like, he's very captivating and sad sack as well. Like, he's an interesting character. So I think they look, who are we talking about? Maybe the best documentarians of all time. Like, I give them the benefit of the doubt.
Right. I would too. And again, I think we've seen so many more heavily manipulated, phony versions of this kind of thing as, in the past 50 years, that this seems pretty authentic. But at the same time, it is the presence of the camera, the presence of the filmmakers, and a much more obtrusive, right? You could make this movie now with much less. You could make this movie on an iPhone right now. People might not notice the presence of it as much, but even the more portable equipment that existed in 1969 was very, very obvious and bulky and required a multi-person crew to operate.
When filming, the subjects became part of the pitch, telling those who let the salesman and the camera crew into their homes that they were now part of a human interest story.
Right. And that obviously is going to have some kind of effect. And we don't know exactly what it was, whether it makes people more or less likely to agree. And it's not like this movie is full of successful sales.
But again, you're talking about they're telling the story they want to tell. Maybe there were plenty of successful sales that were left on the cutting room floor.
Right. That is certainly possible. So Jason, you were saying you had seen this a few years ago?
Yeah, I mean, you go and you check off the major films of whatever genre, and this was certainly one of them. Plus, we've talked about documentary now a few times. I always like to watch the documentary before I watch the episode, so that was probably part of it too.
Yeah, I think this is the 5th documentary that we've covered on this show that has a documentary now episode. So always fascinating to watch those together, and this is a good one. I think I mentioned probably when we did our Grey Gardens episode that I got the chance to see this at the 2013 TCM Classic Film Festival with Albert Maysles in attendance a couple years before he died, and he did a Q&A. So that was a cool way to watch it first. And I remember, I'm not sure if it was just something that kind of fit in my slot at the festival or whatever, but I don't think it was something that I was really excited to see. And I remember being really impressed with it at the time, and I enjoyed it now too. I think it's really thematically rich and there's a lot going on, and it's a really fascinating film to watch. So I appreciated it again this time too. David, you seen this before?
I had not heard of it, but obviously I like Grey Gardens when we did that, and I was looking forward to this once it came up on the schedule.
You have heard of it because we mentioned it on the Grey Gardens episode.
Dave doesn't listen to what we say.
No. At least I watch the movies nowadays.
Yeah,
I don't
that's
listen.
True. You gotta get it. He's watched the movies, Jason. Maybe in a few more seasons he'll start listening to us talk. All right, give him some.
He's a busy guy.
Yeah, he is. So, anything else you want to mention about the background of this movie?
Yeah, Josh, I'm surprised you didn't go to your girl Pauline Kael on this one, because she claimed that it was so stagey and manipulated, and that the Maysles recruited Paul Brennan, who she says, quote, was in the roofing and siding business, to play a Bible salesman. And the Maysles threatened to sue the New Yorker for libel and rebutted Kael's claims in an open letter sent to the magazine. But since the New Yorker's policy at the time prohibited the publication of such correspondence, the letter did not appear in print until 1996, when it was included in the appendix of the anthology Imagine Reality, the Faber book of documentary.
Yeah, she didn't make that claim in a review of this movie. She didn't review this movie. That was a later claim she made a couple years after, when she was writing about Gimme Shelter, their documentary about the Rolling Stones. So it didn't really fit with the idea of quoting reviews, but I did see that as well. And I mean, it's interesting because I don't know where she got her idea that they recruited him and he wasn't really a Bible salesman, and they provided this proof, as you said in that letter, that was untrue. But it's, you can see how someone would be skeptical of this as a movie, just watching it, and, would it have been, again, staged, or are these potentially really actors? Because documentaries like this weren't really being made very much.
No, they weren't.
So we'll come back and talk more of our general thoughts on Salesman. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1969, we are talking about the Maysles brothers and Charlotte Zwerin's documentary, salesman. And one thing that struck me about this is 1969, but these people and this sort of world feel like they're already way out of time, even in 1969.
Yeah, this is definitely a 40s or 50s thing. That's what it feels like. I know, my grandfather was a comedian for over 60 years, and he would have to, as he was coming up, find jobs. And I think he was like a portable vacuum salesman at one point. And, in his book, Thanks for the Warning, he talks just about how miserable he was doing that. And I don't blame him.
Yeah, at one point, Paul Brennan is giving a sales pitch to this couple, and he discovers that the husband is a vacuum salesman, right? Mm-hmm. And they're talking about that. And he can't sell that guy either. He can't sell the salesman. He fails there as well.
Paul feels like, those guys like or women who are so desperate, and they're just like trying to get any, I haven't had sex in so long. I'm just going to try to sleep with everyone and anyone who will take me. And you can just smell the desperation on them. That's what Paul feels like to me in this one.
Right. I mean, and that's right. Part of the problem that when you get that sense from someone, you're not going to want to buy something from them because you think, oh, if he's this desperate, like what he's selling me must be not of good quality. Right. And so I'm going to be skeptical. And that the level of confidence in the product or faked confidence in the product is key. And he can't have that because he sort of lost his mojo or whatever.
Even to the point when one of the other salesmen takes him just to like give him that spark again. And like that sale doesn't go well. And Paul even tanks it further with his pitch after the first pitch doesn't work.
Right. It is sad. But as you're saying, it also makes him really compelling that when they started, the Maysles are looking at these 4 salesmen, and we do see a bit of the other one, especially the rabbit there. We get some stuff with him on his own, but obviously Paul is the one who's the most compelling. And the reason he's the most compelling is because he's the most pathetic.
What would your nickname be as a salesman, Josh?
I think I'd be worse as a salesman than Paul Brennan. So I don't even know what kind of animal you want to, the sloth.
What?
I'd be the really, the salesman who's always behind everyone else. I don't know.
Dave, what about you?
The polar bear?
It's pretty good.
Yeah, that was Dave's rap group was the Polar Bear MCs. So
yeah.
I think if I was there, Paul would be like, and then there's Jason Harris, the Jew.
Yes.
Yeah, they make that explicit in the documentary Now parody. But but Jason, you are a friendly, charismatic guy, which is key, as I was saying about as my sister as well, to being a salesman. And you've had retail jobs, right? And you were good at selling people stuff.
I was great at it because, like you were saying, I never tried to sell anybody anything, right? I would just talk to them. Look, I worked for a major technology company that you might have a phone from or whatnot, the fruit stand, as we called it. And I never tried to sell anyone anything. And the reason was, one, usually if you're coming into that store, you know what you want. I mean, if they wanted something and didn't know, obviously I would kind of lead them, show them the different products that would fit their needs. But the other thing was, unlike these guys, like when you train for them, they tell you like, hey, you don't have to worry about it. If you sell nothing, it's cool because there's no commission. And you're like, oh, that's awesome. There's no pressure. And then you sell a lot of your stuff and you're like, I want commission. I earned it, So.
Yeah, I also did some retail work, back in high school and college. And I worked in various bookstores where you would have to try to upsell them on the little like membership thing. And I was always bad at that. And there were no commissions on that. But I remember at certain times, it kind of went back and forth. But I think at certain times there were quotas where you would have to sell a certain number of those per week or whatever. And I always was very bad at that. Because I mean, I love books and I love reading, but the little like membership discount club or whatever was not something that I could believe in per se. And so I think I would only be able to sell it to someone who was already inclined to buy it.
Yeah, I know we talked about this on another episode not too long ago, because at that time I was working for Blockbuster and I got like special recognition from the district manager about how good I was at selling those memberships. So,
right.
I'm a Barnes and Noble member and they've never pressured me. They tell me what it is. And like, obviously I want to support the bookstore anyway. I think it's a good deal.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would pressure people, but it wasn't the pressure on the customers, but I think there was the pressure on the employees from the managers or whatever to sell a certain number of these. So yeah, we have talked about this recently. I don't remember why it came up before. But I mean, I think what comes across here, though, is that like, even though these guys are professional salesmen and they've been doing it for a number of years, I mean, at one point, at least, I think Paul or one of the others talks about how they've been a Bible salesman for what, 8-10 years or something. They don't seem like they're good at it. And every time they go through what you're talking about, like what you did in your job at Apple of just like being friendly.
I never said the company.
Right. No, okay.
Record,
I don't know.
So I don't get sued by the giant technology
NDA.
company.
So
that's an assumption, Josh.
Yeah. In your job at that company, you know, the idea of just talking and being friendly and being interested in what the people have to say and their lives. I mean, we see some of that. And Paul, you know, trying to talk to them about their kids or whatever. And it just comes off as so phony. You never get the sense that any of these guys are actually being genuinely friendly or genuinely interested in these people's lives.
Right. Yeah. Their numbers, their quota, like you were saying. And, you know, it's so weird because, Josh, you would never find phoniness in religious people. So this is just such an outlier to me. I don't get it. But I do really gravitate back towards that point. And, you know, they could even hammered it home a little more, which is like, these are people out of time, right? This is something that, you know, in the early 60s, maybe you would put on your hat and take your newspaper under your arm and your briefcase and go make those sales. But at this point, it's already like too late to be doing this. It feels like, and that anachronistic quality was one of the interesting points of the film, along with what I think they did a great job of like showing them in Northeast Boston, a very religious area. And then when they went down to Miami, not to say it's not a religious area, but it's a totally different world. And they all have these high hopes that quickly gets dashed.
Right, right. And I think there are a lot of Catholics, especially, and we only have the one scene where we see someone who is a Spanish speaker and maybe, you know, I would imagine like a Cuban immigrant probably, but they don't specifically say in Florida. But a lot of those, that immigrant community are devoutly Catholic. And, you know, but these clueless white guys from Boston or from the Northeast don't really have an in that area. And that was one of my favorite scenes. It's with the rabbit. And he's talking to this woman and she has, you know, she has an accent and she says she doesn't speak English that well, although she seems to speak English fine and understand what he's saying, except when he's trying to tell her about some sort of new product that they have. And he says they can now get it on order. But the way he says it in his accent, he said, we have it on order. And she clearly does not know what word he's saying. And he has to say it over and over and over again. And she does not understand what he's saying. It's a very amusing scene.
I marked it down. It's called the Missal, Missal. And I don't know what that is to this day, but we do take orders for the
Missal. We take orders.
So if that's what you want,
I mean, I think she knows what it is because he says like, oh, do you have one of these? And she says, yes. It's some sort of thing to follow along with the service, I guess, in church. Is what it sounds like. And so he's trying to tell her that we have this cool new one and she just does not get it, what he's trying to say. And he does not get that the way he speaks that word is confusing to her. And it's very amusing.
Well, but this is what I'm saying about it, right? Like she clearly says she doesn't want the Bible or whatever. And he's like, well, let me let you in on something. We got another little thing I shouldn't even tell you about, but we can. Get you the Missal. It's ready for order, you know.
Do you want the true coat? We can get you the true coat.
Right. They all have their techniques, but you know, Josh, another interesting thing, and it really added to it, is we're not just following them as they do the sales. We're going to the sales meeting with them. We're with their boss, Kenny, good farm-raised, corn-fed boy, you know, from the Midwest, probably off this Nebraska. And I was telling you, like, you know, his like kind of motivational speeches seemed so unmotivating to me, but like, I liked the scene they're all playing cards and he's like, tomorrow we're going to Florida, but tonight we're playing poker.
Right. And I feel like these guys would also, I mean, they're just playing amongst themselves, but if these guys went to Vegas or went to some sort of poker room and tried to play poker, they would probably all be terrible at like bluffing and things like that, which you'd think salespeople would be good at.
Oh, yeah.
I also found it interesting, you know, and this is of that time, right? Kenny's wife is with them on the sales meeting, and like he's just like, all right, get out of here. I'm with the boys now. And she's like, all right, you boys have fun.
Yeah, I mean, he has another great bit where they do sort of like a play acting scene, and he's trying to show them like, see how you can make a sale, and it's just, it's obviously not in any way a real reflection of what they're encountering in the field, and he doesn't have to go out, and it's unclear like, was he himself a salesman before and he got like promoted to supervisor or something or whatever, but he seems to be out of touch with the reality of what they're facing when they're going into these homes.
And Josh, as we've learned, they're out of touch and they're out of time. Hall & Oates got it right.
Thank you for that. So, I mean, the other great moment is when they go to this big sales meeting, right, with people from the company, and we get this presentation from the guy who has like designed and edited or whatever their Bibles. This guy Melbourne I. Feltman. And
I know the most Jewish sounding name of the movie.
And he gives this speech that is just, you talk about religious hypocrisy, and he's trying to say like, oh, we are, I'm not saying that God would sell Bibles, but we are doing God's work here. Like, come on, guy. Nobody believes in what they're doing, and neither do you. But he's trying to hype them up this way as if they're following some higher calling here.
But some of them do believe, maybe not. I think, like at that meeting, they all stand up and they're the ones who are like, I really think I could make $50,000 this year. You know what? By God, I'm going to do it. Right. Like they're all like talking about what a great opportunity it is. And I wrote down that quote. It might have been your boy Feldman, Josh, who said it was like, if you aren't selling Bibles, it's your fault. Right. Like the product's so good. It sells itself. It's so easy. Right. Exactly. So
everyone wants a $400 Bible.
Look at the pictures.
Yeah. But no, I mean, what I'm saying is not that they don't believe in their abilities as salesmen, but the religious aspect that he's trying to tell them like, oh, God is calling us to shill this expensive ass Bible. But no one there believes in that.
I'm going to disagree with you that you and I don't believe that, but like these are religious people. But a lot of them do believe that.
I don't know. Like, I mean, the people they're selling to are religious, but I feel like there's moments too where one of the other salesmen is right. He's trying to like hype up Paul Brennan to one of the customers. He's like, oh, he's such a devout Catholic. And like, I did not believe for a second that Paul Brennan was a devout Catholic.
I did.
All right.
Maybe I'm the Rube and they could sell to me.
I guess. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, maybe they are because like you said, like, they come from these communities. I mean, Paul comes from this Boston community and there are a lot of Catholics in these areas. And maybe they're Catholics in the sense that it's just part of their culture, but are they really religious people who believe in the holiness of what they're selling? I just don't really feel like that is the case.
Well, Josh, no Bible for you today.
I don't want a Bible. None of us here we're definitely not the target market for these guys. I don't think we would be the ones that they would be selling to.
I mean, it's funny because Scarlett, my daughter, and I, we talk about like fun ways when scam calls come in to like how to answer them. And my friend, my writing partner, Scott Johnson, I was with him once and he got one and they're like, hello, we're calling about insurance, and he, we have that acting background. Yes. And he goes, so he gets on, he's like, ooh, insurance. I was hoping someone would call me about insurance. I'm very interested in new insurance. Are you interested in new insurance? Maybe I can sell you some insurance. Right. And I feel like these door-to-door salesmen, like if they were as annoying and as regular as the spam calls, they would be fun to let into the house and just try to fuck with their whole pitch.
And that's probably something that happened in this era. I mean, it's harder to do that, I feel like, to someone face to face when you see a human being there and see their reactions than it is over the phone, or especially what we have nowadays is they're like texting you or messaging you on social media or something with these scams. And I see a lot of people who post like screenshots of themselves. A couple of my Facebook friends do this and they post these screenshots of themselves trying to mess with these scammers or whatever. But I feel like it would be not as easy or not as fun. Like if you're messing with Paul Brennan to his face, all you would see is like the crushing sadness of Paul Brennan's life as you fuck with him. And it would just not be fun.
Yeah. But again, having seen the tactics that Brennan and the other uses, I think it would be fair play.
Sure.
I guess. I mean, I think as that one review points out, they are themselves like the people that you really want to mess with are like Melbourne I. Feltman. They're the real exploiters, the people who run this company, the people in the Catholic Church who've sanctioned this or whatever. They're the real ones who are exploiting people.
Clearly the worst thing the Catholic Church has ever done.
Sure. Definitely not. So, Dave, did you have any favorite moments from this?
Well, I have a weird little tangent I wanted to just throw out there real quick. Have either of you guys ever seen that Austin Powers deleted scene where it shows the henchman, where it's like his home life, where he had to deal with Austin Powers coming in and, defeating them? This reminded me of like this weird side moment of like a Coen Brothers side character. Like one of these weird kind of schmucky small town guys and their like day job, basically. That's what this movie reminded me of.
I think you could definitely start a season of Fargo with it, where like a door-to-door salesman goes into a house and then there's a murder in the backyard and it unravels over the season, right?
That would rule.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we don't see much of their personal lives as this, those reviews point out. I mean, we get that one moment of Paul Brennan like on the phone with his wife, having the most banal conversation you can possibly imagine about how fast he's going to drive. And it was fascinating to me. I looked up, I was trying to find, information we'll talk about later for the legacy about where these guys ended up. And I found this article about Paul Brennan later on that mentions that apparently during the filming of this, he was separated from his wife. And so they're having this very strained conversation. And in fact, one thing that's not in the movie is that he shows up to his daughter's wedding with the documentary film crew that she had not known would be there. And because she would not sign off on it, they couldn't use it in the film. So not the greatest reflection of Paul Brennan as a person.
Maybe just say like, hey, sweetie, congrats on the wedding. By the way, I'm bringing the movie crew with you.
Yeah, but apparently that's not what he did. So I don't know if that footage exists somewhere, but presumably the Maysles are still unable to.
You can see it on the Austin Powers outtakes.
Yes.
Austin Powers, not a connection I would have expected to make to this film as I was watching it.
Hell yeah.
Josh, one other scene that I liked is when one of the salesmen, I think it was the young fella that you had mentioned earlier, James Baker or whatever.
The rabbit?
Yeah, I think it was him. I might be wrong, but he's trying to sell to this lady, and her husband just blasts Yesterday by the Beatles. And
but like a weird instrumental version of it that sounds awful.
Yeah, and he's still going through with the pitch, but you can see he wants to be like, turn the fucking music down, right? And he's like, oh, that's a good song right there. So
yeah, and all the other thing is like all these people, they're going to their homes, they're all like in their underwear or they've got like curlers in their hair, like, and people are just letting strangers into their homes while they're half naked or whatever.
I can't really speak on that.
Jason wearing a shirt as we record this episode in contrast to some other recent recording sessions.
Well, that's because the pants are off.
Nice.
Good to know there. So have you ever been to Opelika, Florida, Jason?
Nope. Nor have I been to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, or Tallahassee, Florida, but I have heard the band Waxahachie.
Yeah, Opelika, the like sort of Arabian Nights themed town or something like that. All these street names like Sinbad and Alibaba. And I love how, Paul gets lost in this town and it's this very like kitschy, again, like Arabian Nights version. And then when he's back in the hotel, he tells the other guys like, oh, that must have been the Muslim district. Like, this is what these guys think Muslims are creating as their environments here when they've, immigrated to the United States.
I mean, again, one thing I thought when he was lost is like, yeah, it must have been hard to do this without iPhones and everything like that. So you could get your, you had to look at maps,
right?
Josh.
Yeah. No, and not even like MapQuest where they could print out the directions. They just got the paper map. They got to ask people. There's a lot of scenes of Paul trying to ask people on the street, "Hey, where is this road or whatever?"
Josh, you good at reading the maps?
No, I'm not. I have a very poor sense of direction. So the development
that I do know about you.
The development of GPS has been very helpful to me because I think, Jason, you and I drove across country one time, right? Using maps. Yeah. And you were the navigator, I'm sure.
I think we probably printed that out. That was MapQuest. But what I do sometimes when I go to a new city is I get lost on purpose because I do have a good sense of direction. and I can often find my way back, no matter how. And then I've learned the city.
Right. Well, I feel like that's a lot of, a common thing for people to do, but I would just end up being totally.
Well, thanks for making me not feel special.
No. I'm trying to say in contrast to me, and my inability to find my way around, when I would not do that in a new city, because I would just end up confused and stranded probably.
Yeah, that would be hilarious.
Yeah. Thank you. So, should we rate this out of 5 $400 Bibles?
Yeah, I gave it 3.5, which is a step up from last time when I originally gave it 3. Watch the movie. Get your documentary history in, guys.
Yeah, it's a good one. I give it 3.5 Bibles as well. Again, I enjoyed it just as much this time. I think there's a lot going on here. If you think, oh, this is just about this sort of outdated practice, it's a fascinating film to watch. So, Dave, how would you rate it?
I'm actually going to 4. I had given it 3.5 on Letterboxd, but I've been thinking about this one and just kind of chuckling to myself all week. So yeah, I'm going to 4.
Dave, which salesman do you relate this to?
I hope I don't relate to any of them, honestly.
Yeah. None of these people are role models in any way. So we'll come back in a moment and talk about the legacy of Salesman. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1969, we are talking about our documentary pick, Salesman, from the Maysles brothers and Charlotte Zwerin. And as we said, we have done an episode already on these filmmakers. We talked about their later film, Grey Gardens, and so we've talked about their legacy a bit already. Grey Gardens and Gimme Shelter, their most famous documentaries. But the Maysles are two of the most famous documentary filmmakers of all time. Albert especially had a very long career. David passed away in 1987, but Albert continued working right up until his death in 2015. And, late in his career had a kind of big, late career hit with the film Iris, about Iris Apfel, which got a lot of awards attention. And I remember enjoying.
Good film.
Yeah, it is. And strangely, though, given that reputation, the only time they were ever nominated for an Oscar was for a short film in 1974 called Christo's Valley Curtain. And they worked a lot with that artist, Christo, making documentaries about his work.
I didn't know that. Charlotte Zwerin, Josh, like you said, co-director, editor. Gimme Shelter, Running Fence, probably her two most famous other projects. Besides this, and she probably was on Grey Gardens too. I don't remember.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about her when we did our Grey Gardens episode, and she is credited as co-director there. And as we said, I think then, the Maysles have this huge reputation, and yet she's right there as a co-director with them, but doesn't get her credit necessarily. And in part, that's why she eventually stopped working with them. They would not allow her to be a producer. And so she did go on and direct her own solo films in the 80s and 90s. A lot of music documentaries, including one on Thelonious Monk called Straight No Chaser that I think is pretty well known. So, she's a major figure too in the history of documentary that probably doesn't get her due.
Well, we just gave it to her, Josh.
We're trying.
Josh, I got something for you on our friend Paul there, Paul Brennan. I love this. So apparently he was found so captivating in this film that he was offered a role in a film shooting in Spain, but he turned it down because he thought the part wasn't big enough.
Yeah, I was trying to find, information really about any of these guys. And according to IMDb, he has a role in this 1980 film, which is a women's wrestling drama, Jason, that you might want to watch called Below the Belt. But it's not clear to me if that's really him or some other guy.
I think it might be a different Paul Brennan.
IMDb has maybe confused him with someone else who has the same name. But I did look him up further. He died in 1990, and I found this article by Gerald Peary, who's a very well-known film critic, who in 1990 tracked Paul Brennan down at the Mattapan Chronic Disease Hospital in Boston, which is a hospital for like wards of the state. So here he was, he's dying of rheumatoid arthritis. He can't even afford his own medical care. And Gerald Peary shows up there and tells the staff like, hey, I'm here because this guy was in like one of the most famous documentaries of all time. And nobody there even knew that. And so that's where I got the information about his ex-wife, because Peary interviews the ex-wife and she mentions that about, the wedding that he tried to show up at. And this quote I have from the ex-wife, she says, I wouldn't marry Paul again or live with him again, but I have a lot of sympathy for him.
I mean, I think Paul is a mix of two Simpsons characters, Gil, the one who's always or Gil, and Grimes, the one who, no matter how he tries to succeed Homer, without any effort, out succeeds.
Yeah, he definitely has that desperation. So Charles McDevitt, the Gipper, died in 2018. Raymond Martos, the Bull, died in 2016. So they had much longer lives than Paul Brennan. I couldn't find any information about the rabbit. But one thing that I loved that I found, you can buy a Melbourne I. Feltman edition of the Bible on Amazon right now for $49.98.
Hey, that's not bad.
Yeah. So the price that it was then is still the price that it is now.
Amazing.
Yeah. Good work.
So anything else you want to mention on the legacy of this movie, Jason?
What else is there to say? You know it's good for you. Just watch it.
That is a perfect note to end on. So that is Salesman, and that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. Sell us a Bible online and on social media.
Or anything else that you want, Josh. We're at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on Salesman, the platform where you can buy all types of crap. And that includes information. I'm Jason Harris Comedy or Jay Harris Comedy, plus Eat This Comedy on your socials. Look out for shows. Find me on Letterboxd. Go for Jason, where I rated this 3.5 stars this time.
All right. You can find some old stuff from me at joshbellhateseverything.com. I am at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook and at Signal Bleed on X, Twitter, as well as on Blue Sky and on Letterboxd. And if you're on Letterboxd and you watch this movie or any movie we talk about, tag your review Awesome Movie Year. We'd love to know what you think about the movies we cover on this show. You can listen to our producer David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. And Jason, you should try to sell the good listeners on signing up for our Patreon.
You know it's good for you. It's right there. The kids will find the value in it just by being around it.
That's at patreon.com/bydavidrosen.
That pitch is going to get so many new signups, I guarantee.
Listen, if you order now, we do have the Patreon. You just have to place a special order for it.
Jason, what's in our next episode?
Josh, it's your pick. You tell us. I'm sure it's about a lady.
It is about a lady. It is The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, starring Maggie Smith, and based on a very well-known novel and play. So tune in next time for that. And thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.